Good evening, everybody. I'm Barry Howard from the Webster Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to our spring edition of the Electronic Town Meeting. I am here with our supervisor, Tom Flaherty. Tom, thanks for having me again tonight. It's nice to be back into the swing of doing these on a regular basis. We hope to get back to the point where we can have guests as soon as the protocol allow us, so that we can have a couple of people come in. In the past, we've always had a department head that's come around, and it's always been fun to ask them questions about what goes on in their department and learn about what's going on. But we've got a couple of topics. We'll start with the fact that, before I forget it, I want to talk about the fact that the town has a new feature that's on the website and is on a regular weekly basis, is the new newsletter. And the newsletter has got some really great stuff in it, including some tidbits from the department heads about what's pertinent to what's going on right now. So maybe there would be something with the assessing department because it's almost time for assessment board, or the Board of Assessment review, or building permits, or those kinds of things. And so that's something that you are able to sign up by going to the Webster Town website, and you can sign up for the alerts so that you get an alert. You'll get a little email that says the latest newsletter's out, and you can click on it and get it. And it's very well done, and it's pretty comprehensive. I've been pretty impressed with it. So I know that was an initiative that's been in the works for quite some time, and we finally got to fruition with that. So that's a plus.
And Barry, that was Karen Buck's brainchild, and I don't want to speak for her, but I think you had a situation where you have all this information that she was uploading to the website and Facebook pages and various social media, and people were getting back saying, geez, it was kind of nice if that was all in a consolidated area, and voila, she came up with the weekly newsletter to kind of bring it all into a format that, and it's been around since mid-February, and people really like it.
Yeah, it's awesome. Well, and in the world that we live in today, people take 10 seconds to read something, and so it's nice that she's got the bullets right up there that let us know the quick things to look at, and then the extensive part you can look, to read further, kind of thing. So yeah, I think that's a good job. And thanks to Karen Buck for that. Speaking of Karen Buck, there's a rumor afoot that Karen Buck has dug into the old dusty boxes at the channel studio here in Webster, our Webster channel, and that she's dug out some old, I was going to say films, but that might be back a little bit further, tapes, because they're not electronic, but she's converting them into electronics. So they're going to be they're going to put together a montage, I think that's a good word for it, of clips from old parades that Mike Auger, who was Karen's predecessor, did when we were in the Fireman's Parade, that we did, I think, for 30 some odd years. I'm pretty sure that last year was the first year that we didn't do a parade in like 30 something years. And this would be back when all my hair wasn't gray. And Mike looked like he was in grade school, because he always looked like he was in grade school. So that'll be a fun thing to look forward to, especially since we got the news this week that the Webster Fire Department has decided that compliance with the COVID restrictions and guidelines is going to be a little too much for them to do a carnival and a parade this year. So we're disappointed that can't happen, but certainly understand it in the world that we're in today. That they're not able to do that. So the fact that Karen Buck is putting that together, because one of the things that's always fascinated me, and I know that mothers, I think, loved the parade more than anybody else in town, because they could park children in front of the television and let them watch the parade, and the kids had a blast with all of the fire trucks and all of the bands and all of that stuff. So it was always fun for that. So thank you to Karen for that, and I'm looking forward to it. What should we talk about first?
Well, and can I just interject, Barry, that since we are now into May, we just found out this past week that we will not have a Memorial Day parade in Webster. And I was kind of saddened by that, because we were working with the reps from the VFW and the American Legion, and I had said, hey, I'm very open to having that parade. It's May 31st is Memorial Day, and I just figured that by that time, with vaccinations and you're outdoors and all that. But when they started to look into the state guidelines and what restrictions are on, the VFW and the American Legion decided to forego having the parade again this year. They are going to have the ceremony at the cemetery.
Oh, that'll be good.
But we're still in it,
Yeah,
aren't we?
we're still in it.
Still in it.
And hopefully we'll be, hopefully we'll be making some progress through the summer. Now that the weather's getting warmer, I think that'll help, and that always cuts down on virus transmission, so.
Yeah.
Well, speaking, I guess, let's talk about for a second, while we're on the topic of COVID. The federal government passed the American Rescue Act, which has a tremendous amount of money in it. Some of it's actually for COVID relief. And I know that means that the state of New York and some local governments are going to be in line for some stimulus money and some recovery money. And the town, talk about that for a minute. The town is on that list, I think, right?
And actually, Barry, if you don't mind, there's actually two components of this. I mean, you have I think it's a $1.9 trillion CARES iteration 2 or whatever. But you also have the proposed Infrastructure Act. And I think, Barry, you and I are similar on this. When you throw around trillion-dollar packages, all the glitters of gold, someone's going to be paying this back. So not to be a buzzkill to lead off on this, but just prefacing that this is not, money doesn't grow on trees, as I say to my kids, but they're starting to wonder if it does, based on this. But first component is in the CARES Act, because there was local government monies allocated, the town of Webster is slotted to get $4.95 million from that. Now, of that, the village of Webster is getting $600,000. So the town is all of a sudden going to come into $4.35 million. And we're still waiting on some guidance from the Treasury Department of, what those funds can be used for. I think the intention was that it was for COVID budgetary shortages. Because the town of Webster has, I think, historically always budgeted very conservatively. We came through COVID, or at least to this point, we're okay budget-wise. Other municipalities are not. If they're aggressive on their budget when they were shorted certain revenues, they're going to need this money.
Right.
But it's something I've said to the town board, and I've written some articles on this. It's analogous to when you got your $1,400 stimulus check. And each family, the way they see money is very individualized. Some people took it and immediately went out and bought a $1,400 big screen TV. Others put it in the bank for a rainy day. Others, determined using that money based on how their employment was affected by COVID. Because you got to admit, Barry, being the head of the Chamber of Commerce, some businesses got enriched during COVID. Others got decimated. And my point was, it's analogous to what we're doing with the town. I think we need to take a step-back approach, really read the Treasury guidance, and make sure that this is a measured approach to what we do with that money.
Right.
There's going to be, it's like winning the lottery. We're going to have a lot of uncles and aunts and cousins coming out because everybody's going to want to, their use for that money. The second one I won't spend a lot of time on because we don't even know if it'll get through. But if the infrastructure bill goes through, and I haven't really read up on just how much, but it would be allocated to bridges, roads, maybe if there's things like highway garages, sewer plants,
Right.
Whether the town of Webster would benefit from that, is our friend who we work with on the Webster Economic Development Alliance, Matt Chatfield, has said, this is potentially generational opportunity for the town.
Right.
And I don't disagree with him on that. I know that, Barry, you and I are sitting there saying, yeah, it's also that's a lot of money coming from the federal government. And, whether we're for that kind of commitment by the federal government, if it happens, how does the town of Webster maximize their, when we have, as you know, aging infrastructure, so.
And that's always been the thing. I mean, it's one of the decisions that the town board has to make, that you have to do in conjunction with our finance department, is to just talk about the fact that there are certain things that we need to do, and they're going to be things that are going to have an impact 20 or 30 years from now. And it's
Yeah.
one of the things that New York State, as an example, New York State has had this issue for years and years and years, that we seriously have bridges that are falling down into the
Yes.
Erie Canal.
Yeah.
They're just falling apart because they weren't taken care of over the years. The money wasn't invested, and you know as well as I do that there's a philosophy there that you prepare into the future for capital expenditures. And so, given this opportunity with this money, we want to make sure that we are cautious, that we are planned, that we do have a plan for it, and that we're thinking things through, and not just, for lack of a better analogy, just running out and buying a $1,400 big screen TV.
Yes,
There's
and I
got to
mean,
be
as you
something
can imagine,
between
Barry,
putting it all in the, burying it in a can in the backyard versus spending it all. There's someplace in between that makes perfect
that's
sense
a
for the
perfect way
Webster,
to explain it,
for the
Barry.
for,
Yes.
for
Yeah.
the town.
Yeah.
So, well, speaking of spending money,
Am I getting a reputation?
let's
or-
talk. Well, we won't go there.
Yeah, right.
Let's talk for a minute about a topic that seems to be pretty hot around town. And I know that you've received a lot of emails on it, and that you've gotten a lot of input from people, including landowners. So let's talk a little bit about open space. So several years ago, we went to the town voters and said, would you like to spend some money on open space? And the voters said no.
Correct.
And then a couple of years later, we went to the voters and said, well, how would you like to spend this much, which was X less? I think we ended up spending like $7 million.
Correct.
And we bought some open space. We bought land that can never be developed, and put that into open space in the town. And we bonded that. And that bond is about coming due, I think, in the next couple of years.
Yes. Yeah.
And so it's an opportunity for us to look at whether or not it makes sense for us to go do it again.
Yes.
Should we look at it? And there's a process in it, and just New York State, you can't make anything easy. So, there's a process in it. So talk to us a little bit about what that process would be, and some hidden costs that are really kind of ridiculous, but they're there.
Well, and we had a town board workshop about 6 weeks ago on this, where a consulting firm that was utilized back in 2005, when we had the last referendum, that within approximately 1,000 acres were purchased for $7 million. And as you said, 2 years earlier in 2003, there was a referendum for 3,000 acres for $21 million. And the town citizens voted that down. The consulting firm that worked with the town back then, we have started to talk to them again about putting together some configuration that the earliest a referendum will be on the ballot would be November of 2022. One of the snags is, Barry, and you and I have talked about it, is that, look, if it was a free ride, that we didn't have to spend one penny of taxpayer money to put on the ballot, hey, do you want to buy X acres for X whatever $1,000 million? Then let's have at it. But the way this works is a lot of times the town board is going to have to approve spending $100,000, $200,000 plus to get in a position to be on the ballot. And that is problematic to me. We're trying to work through it, because that could end up being good money sent after bad. Because as you know, Barry, two things that I have figured out during campaigning for this position, and certainly being in the position of supervisor, but also being a citizen here for the last 25 years, everybody likes open space. And nobody wants to see the town grow to 70,000 people. Everybody agrees on that. It's the means by which we get there, and that's where we people start to disagree. So it's what seems on the surface like a simple issue. There are complications to it, and some of it is you don't want to just buy land to sit there and be an empty field. If you can look at another parcel of land that kind of makes sense more to our park system, our trail system. In fact, tomorrow night on the May 6th Town Board agenda, we're finalizing up an approximate 20-acre purchase of the Eckler property that abuts is it 4 Mile Creek?
And
That has been sought after for years by the town because it really fit into the trail and the park or the open space. So that's a makes sense 20 acres for the town to obtain for the enjoyment of the town citizens. Whereas, Barry, there's some other 20-acre parcels that all you would be doing is buying that land to just sit there. Maybe that is the answer, but I certainly know this. I'm excited about the town purchasing the Eckler property for what it does for Friends of Webster Trails and things that they think are going to be great for walking and whatever.
Well, it really connects two pieces. If you look at
Yeah.
it, it's like a little missing piece of the puzzle. It brings
Yes.
that all together.
Yeah.
That piece is going to be. But it's interesting that because of the way the rules are written, we can't run the town like we maybe would run our household or the way we would run our business. We would look at it and say, well, let's allocate $7 million and we're going to go build a new building. Sometime in 2023, 2024,
Right.
let's gear up and get that money in place and get everybody's approval. And if we have a board of directors, we're going to do that. So it's almost impossible for us to go to the voters and say, hey, we'd like to spend, like $5 million on some open space, and would you guys say yay or nay? Well, we're not really allowed to do that. What we really have to do is go back and say, if we're going to spend $5 million, it's going to be for these specific
Yes.
things.
Yes.
And so that, in order for that whole thing to get put together, it's $200,000 to put together the plan to go on to the referendum and then have them say no, which has happened to us
Yes,
before,
it has.
where the voters have said no. That's a hard pill sometimes to say. All right, we have to pay to have the plan put in place. But I don't think I think your assessment is amazingly on point that everyone wants open space, but
Yes.
the real difficulty becomes, how should we get it? And one of that begs then the question of control of land, and there's different ways. You can buy a piece of property outright, or you can buy the development rights to it and say to somebody,
Yes.
you promise to never develop this property, for the next 30 years or 50
Yes.
years, and then what do you do at the end of 50 years, or if there's a buyout for them, which is what happened with the golf course was in one of those plans where they weren't going to, and then
Yes.
they bought out of it. They were penalized to come out of that.
Correct.
And so there's different ways to do that. And then, you've got the inventory of land that, there's some land that's just very, very valuable in the sense of preservation.
Right.
Like we don't want somebody to develop, really environmentally sensitive areas. And so that's where all of the controversy comes in. And then we still have people that really just think that the town should just go buy that piece so that they don't turn it into an XYZ, whatever the XYZ is, more houses or another business or
Right.
or a medical building or a factory or a manufacturing facility. And the reality is we just don't have that ability to just say, okay, we're going to just stop that development by buying it and just go through life that way.
Well, and I liked your analogy of a private entity or versus a government as far as us going and buying land and just saying this is what we're going to do. Bringing it even more analogous to just mom and pop. Can you imagine, Barry, if you went out and you bought a house for $100,000, but really the cost ended up being $125,000?
Right.
House cost is $100,000, but there's another 20% on top of that. That's essentially when you do a referendum for land, that if the referendum, I'm just using round numbers, passes for $1 million, 20% of that cost is what they call soft cost. You're only using $800,000 for the actual purchase price of the land. There's the consultants, there's title reports, there's all this stuff. It is relative to going out and buying a house, or certainly us, the town, buying the Eckler property, where that was just your traditional, the seller reached out to the town, would you be interested in buying it? You don't have that 20%. And I don't mind saying that, the accountant in me says, ideally, if the town was buying $1 million in land, I'd like the purchase price to the current owners to be aggregate $1 million, not an aggregate $800,000, where the town taxpayers are paying another $200,000 in soft costs.
Right.
And I certainly am concerned about that kind of money being expended for us to get to the referendum stage for what might be a vote down. Because where everybody wants green space, once they look at the details of what's in the cost and where is the land, there's precedent that in the voting booth, people have said no.
Right, and we've had it happen right here in Webster.
Yes.
You know,
Yep.
there's always some soft costs with any kind of price. So we'll build on yours. You know, when you go buy a house, there's some soft costs. You got to pay lawyers, and there's title
Yep.
searches, and you got to pay fees for filing for mortgages and those kinds of things. So you know, to use your what if they said to you, well, you're buying a $100,000 house, but there's $20,000 worth of soft costs you've got to pay at closing, and they're like, what? I mean, that's the
That is,
ratio.
yes.
That 20,000, 20% is just it's really but that's something that we got to start to look at. So where do we go next? I know you guys had a workshop on this a few weeks ago, and where is it now?
We've had another follow-up meeting. It was essentially an ad hoc committee that formed back, I'll call it, really about a month or two after I became supervisor. And God bless them, we've met probably 6 or 7 times. They have presented in front of the board now. We had a follow-up meeting, and we're trying to stage maybe a more palatable scenario where it costs a lot less than $250,000 to get to the referendum stage. So that's where we're at.
That would be good.
And I want to make sure, I am certainly not against at all town taxpayer money going to buy green space. I just want to be fiscally responsible, and also, like I said before, not every 20-acre parcel is the same. The Eckler 20-acre parcel fits into our footprint great.
And it makes sense that we want to make sure that we're spending the taxpayers' money as wisely as we can, and that we're not spending money on things that we don't have to.
Right.
If there's an alternative way to do it, and present it to the voters without spending $200,000, so that if they say no, well, we just spent $200,000 and we don't have 1 acre we don't have 1 square foot of
Right.
open space, but we just spent $200,000 getting to the point where we don't have what we all want. We all want more open space. We all want the town to be developed in a way that makes perfect sense and
Well,
that
just-
fits.
Can I say, putting it to $200,000, if it's money flushed down the toilet because they turned down the referendum, the last 2 land purchases that have happened by the town, the Bruckner 40 acres and now the Eckler 20 acres, that's 60 acres of property that I want to say the aggregate cost between those two is $200,000 or less.
Right.
That's what $200,000 instead of in soft costs that was
It got us 60 acres.
60 acres. So there's the quantifying. Well, it's only $200,000. Well, it's 60 acres. So if you're into green space, is there a way that the town could attain more green space without having to spend those? I don't know.
Well, and it's one of the great advantages that we have in Webster. You and I have spoken many times about it, because we have WEDA, the Webster Economic Development Alliance, and our executive director is Matt Chatfield. That's run by the five entities. We have the town, the village, the school district, the business improvement district, and the Webster Chamber of Commerce. And the 5 heads of those entities all meet on a monthly basis, and Matt works for us as the executive director. And so Matt's got his ear to the ground every minute. And one of the things that may even come out of this infrastructure bill is the opportunity to use that money for land acquisition. So
Right.
Matt's always looking for
Yes.
those kinds of things to make sure that anything that we can get in the way of assistance is going to be something that we want to be able to go after. So as part of that, is this committee doing like a little bit of an inventory of the land that
Yes.
we've got?
Yes.
So that's part of that process, so we'll know.
They're not doing an inventory per se of the land that the town already owns. They're going out and figuring out parcels that are eligible for the town to buy.
Okay.
So as a sidebar, I had said, and I'm working with the assessment department and the clerk's office and actually with finance, I want to make sure I understand exactly what the town owns currently. Because it's not as cut and dry as you would think. You got town parks, that's pretty cut and dry, all right? Now, Webster Park is a big green space in town.
Webster, right?
Not owned by the town, it's a county park, but it's green space. You got 134 parkland districts in the town. Essentially, and I'll just give it a 40-acre development for a housing tract. They developed 30 of it, and then they made the other 10 acres around it a parkland district, only for the enjoyment of the people who live in that subdivision. Right. That's a basic description of it. But then, like you said before, selling the rights, and how many of those are out there. And then as Paul Adams, our finance director, let me know at a meeting a week ago, he said, we own a lot more land because over the last several years, instead of creating parkland districts when there was development, they just, they did conservation easements where nothing could ever be built in there. So where it might not be owned by the town, it is forever green.
Right, it is green, it's green space, but not necessarily green space owned by the town.
So I guess I want to, I'm a data guy, as you know, I just want to make sure I understand every category of what is space in the town. There's a little over 20,000, 21,000 acres in this town, or 35 square miles. Where are we at currently? How do we match up against other towns? I'm finding that we do have a lot of green space compared to the other Monroe County towns. I mean, of our size, both geographically and population. I'm not going to compare us against, a Sweden.
Right.
Because that's not a fair,
Right.
Anyway.
But I think that's an excellent approach to it, to take a look at it, because I think that's a question that I would want to ask as a taxpayer is like, what is it going to do? If we have 12% of our acreage is currently in open space, and we're going to go to 12.2, and it's going to cost us $7 million, and we're like, okay, now you tell me we're going to go from 12% to 14% or 15%, and it's going to cost us $7 million. Well, maybe, so that's a piece of information that we will want to be prepared for when the time comes. So having an inventory and a review of what do we have,
right,
under what circumstances, and then what's the next option? What makes the next best sense?
And Barry, that I don't know the exact numbers, but I'm sure back in the 1980s, all the farming fields and all that, when we had a population in the 25,000 range, and then those fields started to sell and developers and whatever, that's how we got to 46,000 people. Nobody wants the town to get to 60 or 70,000 people. I've never met anybody that wants to get the population.
Right. Well, nobody that drives down Ridge Road on a Saturday.
Right.
Nobody wants more cars.
But the action-reaction, and I know we're going to segue into another topic, if you suddenly take your developable, tough one to say, land
that can be
down,
developed.
Thank you. You're the English major, I'm the accountant.
Not me.
You almost by definition have slotted just what the maximum population is going to be in the town.
Right.
Because obviously you can't control, like my house, for instance, if my wife and I sell it someday, if we sell it to a family of 4, well, I have 7 kids, so we were a family of 9. You're on average, a residential house is going to have 4.5 people in it, if it's not a senior. So you're going to take the averages. You can somewhat control how much the population explosion or lack thereof is going to be. And as you know, the biggest tool to do that is
the comprehensive plan. And the last time we had a comprehensive plan was in 2008, I think, was the last time that we did it. And so there's a few things that we have to take into consideration with the comprehensive plan, not the least of which is that it's not something that, you're going to slap together in a couple of weekends by putting 15 or 20 people into a room. It is an extremely comprehensive task. I hate to use the same word, but it's not daunting to that extent, but it's not something that you can just say, well, put a couple people on it and come up with a comprehensive plan and then let's vote on it. It's an arduous process, and it has an expense associated with it.
Yes.
The comprehensive plan doesn't come with, just, here's $50, run some copies. There's quite a bit to it. And so I know that you've already started that process, and it makes sense that the process really begins with what does the current comprehensive plan look like, and what were the strategies that we outlined in that 2008 document, and then what of those have actually come to fruition?
Correct.
And then what hasn't come yet? And then, so what are you asking? You've kind of gone out with a request to
and
people.
Barry, if I'm not one thing, I guess if I'm not, I'm consistent, and that consistency somewhat can frustrate people who want maybe things done faster. We need a new comprehensive plan. I don't disagree with that, but I've looked at that plan. It's 140 pages long and has 16 different maps and charts that engineers and architects put together. But on page, I think it's 96 to 109 of this plan is a summary of the initiatives that were identified in the 2008 plan. Mm-hmm. And they break down the summary, Barry, by these are going to be done ongoing, that category. These will be done within the next year, immediately. Within the next 2 years is the next category. Within 5 years is the fourth, and the last category is within 10 years. 5 categories. 2008 plan. Barry, as you know, it's 2021, so even the 10-year ones, they would have been done by now. So it now effectively acts as a scorecard. So I've asked 11 different people that have worked for the town in high department head positions or have been on various boards in the town for at least 20 years, because they would have been here during 2008. They probably were involved in developing that plan, and I've asked them to do this. I want you to take those initiatives, that page 96 through 109, and do me a favor. Just mark yes or no next to the initiative. Try not to overthink it, just yes or no. And we're going to compile that data and see, do 11 people all say that this one initiative never happened? And if it didn't happen, why didn't it happen? There's a genre of initiatives that didn't happen. And to me, that's foundational to building the new comprehensive plan. If you don't learn from history, and Barry, you and I are history buffs, you're destined to repeat it. I don't want to be part of a process to put a document out there that we'll look back in 10, 15 years and say some of those things didn't get done.
Well, and one of the things that we have to look at in that evaluation is that on that list of initiatives, it's entirely possible that those initiatives were put on the comprehensive plan without having a pathway to get it done.
Correct.
So as an example, you can't just say, well, we'll just go use eminent domain and go take it away from the owners. You can't necessarily do that. And if that's what that initiative required, then why do we have an initiative that can't be achieved? Right. And that's the piece that we want to also look at. And when somebody looks at that and says, well, the reason it never happened was because it's against the law. Yeah. Or the reason that it never happened was because we didn't have money in the budget. Well, okay, then let's look at those and say, let's not put that same initiative into our newest comprehensive plan if it doesn't make sense or it's unattainable.
There has to be a pathway to achieve the initiative based on the rules of engagement the day you adopt that document. That's how I feel.
Right.
Or like you call it, it becomes essentially a wish list. And wish lists, they don't really have a lot of
and you can't bank on the fact that the whole world is, if you put an initiative in there that requires the New York State Legislature to change the, a major constitutional portion of the way we govern in New York State, then really let's be realistic, because otherwise people have this expectation and then they're going to turn around and say, well, it never happened. No, you guys didn't make that goal. You didn't make that happen, and it's not what we want. What we want is a comprehensive plan that gets us as best as we're able to where we would like to be.
Yes.
And there are people out there that are going to say we should never cut another tree down in all of Webster. That's part of our strategy. And then there are other people that are going to say, well, you know what? I don't really mind. Let's have 100,000 people here. Let's build some more houses, which then going to build some more schools. Then we're going to build some more roads. And there's going to be somebody out there that's going to say that's a good idea. But somewhere in between those two of don't ever let anybody develop anything more. And you and I have talked about this, because that's you cannot deny a property owner, and we talked about this. I think Country Max was the piece where we talked about it, is that that land was zoned for that purpose, and it was on the market for a long time, and then people are like, well, the town should just stop it. Well, the town can't just stop it. You can't just say you can't do that when the zoning says, well, you can, as long as you're this far away from the lot line and that far away from the road and this elevate, you know, if you follow all the rules that are in the code, you're good to go, you know. So that brings us to another topic. I don't know how we're doing on time. Our timekeeper's not giving us much indication here today. I don't know, she must be sleeping at the switch, who knows?
Coming in about a half an hour,
There you go. So let's talk a little bit about that. So where are we with the code update? We've got some code update going on right now.
Yes, and you know, we've talked about this previously, that Barbot and Scott, who was the town clerk, the tax collector for years, when she retired last June of 2020, had said in the 2 months leading up to her retirement, she goes, you know, there was always this project I couldn't get to finishing because my day-to-day, and it was updating the codes. And I said, well, how, maybe we should have you come back as a part-time employee if you're not, you know, if you're available, and you can be a project leader on updating the codes. And that's what's happened. She's phenomenal. You know, you don't have to train her on anything because she
knows it.
exactly
she's
what
here
she's
for a
going
long while.
for.
Yeah.
And essentially, it's a step-by-step process. And first thing we had to do is make sure that everybody that's looking at the codes, planning board, zoning board, town board, departments, decision makers, whatever, because of the way we had paper books that are this thick, but we also can go online to general code, they were all different. And I won't get into details of how that happened. It's just so you're looking at a book that says the sky is red. I'm looking at a book maybe online that says the sky is blue, and mine is more updated than yours. So we needed to make sure there was a consistency and that they were all updated, and they were very easily researched, not only by town employees, but by citizens, which is really nice. I mean, almost like a Google research type thing. We're pretty much completed with that. Now the town department heads and various people in the know are taking that book, and it's easier to show a book being this thick than it's hard to say how thick one is that's online, right?
Right.
Here's your 20 pages for your department. What's in these codes that are obsolete? What doesn't make sense in 2021 that when it was written in 1970 made complete sense? Or what code is ambiguous to things changing? So we're starting to identify those, and we're also starting to identify new codes, new laws that essentially I think what's going to happen next, Barry, is that you'll have this public hearing process where here will be a bulk number of codes that we're saying we want to, I don't even know the legal term, expunge, rescind, you know, do away with. And here's the new set of codes and laws we'd like to put in place. I would imagine that process is going to probably happen in 2021, or at least the start of it. It won't be. It's it's going to be a staged process because.
Right. Which makes sense, rather than look at it in a big bulk, all of it all at once.
And I say
Let's
bulk,
look at it
maybe you're talking like 10 at a time. You know?
Right, exactly.
But the reality is this, you know, some people say, well, how can you do that when you're not tackling the comprehensive plan? And the best way I can explain it is that comprehensive plan at its core is going to be when we really look at the current zoning of the town and what zoning needs to change.
By that you mean what parcel, this parcel is going to be zoned for these things, and this parcel is going to be zoned for these things. And then the code is different from that.
Yeah, because the code then gets into, and I mean, this is very oversimplified. If you have a parcel or an area of town that we're saying this group of parcels is a large lot for residential, or R2 for residential, okay? That's going to dictate like lot size, how many houses, all that stuff, okay? Codes and laws, and that's kind of more granular of, well, your shed has to be 15 feet setback. Those are the codes that may be changed, but they're a subset of zoning, if that makes any sense. They per se don't explain zoning overall, but they certainly get into the granular aspect of what you can do on that. And really, to tell you the truth, contrary to popular belief, zoning, once it's set in a comprehensive plan, the change of a parcel zoning, it does not happen that often. we're in the midst right now of discerning a zone change out on Salt Road from R2 to R3, which essentially takes a building lot from 28,000 square feet minimum to 22,000 square feet. It's the first zone change since I've been supervisor. So this is the first one in 16 months. And from what I can tell, the last one that happened was 2018. And just looking back since '08, there's been a couple other parcels or areas that were rezoned. It just doesn't happen that often, which is, it shouldn't. You set it in your comprehensive plan, and that's what it, that's what it should be for the foreseeable future. So, I'd like to think as we move forward on this comprehensive plan, that the people the stakeholders that will get in the room, and there will definitely be townspeople that are on this. One thing I do not want to do, and I said why we're looking at the things from the '08 plan that didn't come to fruition. I wasn't in the room in '07 and '08, but I've been in enough planning things with people and whatever, and sometimes you get the wish list, best laid, well, we really hope this happens.
Right.
But if the rules of engagement aren't there, a pathway to it happening, it's probably not going to happen. Then I think there's sometimes, and I just don't prescribe to this theory, that if you got someone's yelling loud about a certain thing, and he's like, okay, well, we'll just appease that person and we'll write it in, even though the rules of engagement aren't in place today for that ever to happen. I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want to be a part of that. And I mean, I'd rather just be very upfront and honest with people. We're going to put together a comprehensive plan that we think will stand the test of time. And really, as you know, even your best guess of what things are going to be like in 10 years, 15 years, things change.
Well, yeah. And you just, I mean, we 2020 is going to be the year that was, or mostly lost. I mean, you go into January 1st with a brand new budget. You go into January 1st with a brand new set, of objectives for your business, for your local government, for your library, for your school district, for your doctor's office, for your hospitals, and it all explodes with a pandemic that we had no idea. It didn't even start to creep into our peripheral vision until the middle of January when there's this thing going on. So, we just don't know what's coming next, and hopefully we'll never have another catastrophic situation like a pandemic in our lifetime. It's the third one I've lived through in my lifetime, the third pandemic. So, hopefully we'll be able to come up with a comprehensive plan that's actually achievable and that works, and that everybody, never going to have everybody get everything they want. No. But if most of the things that we put into it are things that are reasonable and that people see as possibilities, then we're good with that. So I think that probably, just with the one more thing, you got anything you want to close with, Tom?
Well,
before we close out, because there's just one thing I want to talk about for a second.
I'll make this very quick. Is that I hope we can move to having guests on the show sooner than later. And certainly, we'll see. I'm confident, cautiously optimistic, I guess I should say, that as we get into the summer and hopefully before fall, we'll start to have guests on. And who I would love to have as our initial guest are some of these new department heads that we have. I want the citizens to start meeting them. We're trying to introduce them through bios, in the Webster Today. That only comes out every 3 months. Something like a forum like this might be a nice thing for
that would be good, because we've had quite a few changes in our department heads this past year, and I think now we're up to full roster now.
Yes,
there's
to the best of my knowledge as of today,
right?
No department head is.
We have a new town engineer. We have a new town highway superintendent. We have a new police chief. So those were the last 3 I think that we put in place.
Yes.
And so that's good that we're back up to full roster on all of that.
Yeah. And they're all doing very well.
And that's good. I think that's it's good for the town to obviously especially for the people that work in those departments to get.
Well, and the thing that I'm most, I guess, proud of is that just last week, Pat Stevens, who's our new highway superintendent, had a sit-down for coffee with Joe Herbst, our recently retired highway superintendent. And Pat Stevens also has, interacted a lot with Barry Dean, who's on our board, but was the previous highway superintendent, right, from I think 1990 to 2007. And I've always said this, I mean, I would love to see that succession, the coffee talks or whatever, because
Exactly.
Pat can learn a lot from Joe Herbst and from Barry Dean. And Pat's very open to that, which I really respect in him. And I'm glad to see that, Barry Dean and Joe Herbst, I think, it keeps them tied. They're happy to do it, I guess, is the best way I can explain it. And I just think a functional organization, Barry, I hope in 20 years, myself and 2 or 3 ex-supervisors are sitting at a table once, every couple months with coffee with the current supervisor. Because I think that type of counseling and whatever is good for an organization.
That's a good approach. That's a good approach. So I'm going to close things up for us today, but the one thing that I wanted to bring out got brought to my attention by the Webster Youth Sports Council. They have a health and wellness initiative, and one of the things that has become very alarming in the last month or month and a half, and it's not going to get better anytime soon, it's going to get a little bit worse. And Tom can relate to this. And when our kids were, my kids and your kids are involved in sports activities, and now they're out and about, and we've got accelerated schedules to get back to playing, and we've got practices that are compressed, and we've got kids that have been, they didn't play last spring because everything got canceled, and we haven't allowed the kids to do some of the things that they've done, and so their bodies are not necessarily prepared for this not new, but this activity, that what they were capable of doing pre-pandemic might not be the case still because those muscles weren't being used, or that body part hasn't been exercised to that point, or you haven't stretched, or any of those kinds of things. So the pediatric offices are screaming loud that we've got a lot of kids coming in with injuries. We've got them, some of them are minor injuries, some of them are significant injuries. And that puts a burden on every family. It puts a burden on the kid, and how do they attend school, and they're out, and the crutches, and the casts, and the operations, and all of that. And so, there's just making sure that when you're returning to games, that your students, that your children are ready, that your coaches are ready, and that making sure that we're moving back into it, that we're easing into it, and not just saying, well, we used to do 12 practice sessions, and then we started to play the game. Now we're going to do it in 6, and we're going to start to play the game. That's almost a guaranteed recipe for somebody going to get hurt. Yep. And so parents, just be cautious. Make sure that your kids are talking about the fact that, oh, this is strained, this is achy. Those are the signs. So that's what I've got. We'll be back next month. And we have no idea, as always, what our topic will be, or even if we have a guest. Maybe next year we might. Maybe next month we'll be out in the yard. Maybe we'll set it up at a picnic table and we'll tape it outside. Karen would just absolutely love that. Right? Karen would love that to death, to try and do an outdoor one. The microphone would just love it. So anyway, Tom, thanks for having me. I always am grateful that I've given the opportunity to come in and talk with you and talk about what's going on around town. It's always great. So thank you for that. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching, and have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you.